Okay, let's get started in our second part. We are going to look at when numbers mislead in the news. This is a nice short little article. And so again, our think, pair, share questions are: what's an average? What's the difference between an average and a typical response? Can there be more than one typical response? And what is the problem with treating an average as a normal response? So an average first is a general way of saying that something is a mean, a median, or a mode. Now, what we tend to think of when we tend to think of an average is the mean, meaning all the numbers have been added together and divided by the total n. That would be a mean, or what we consider to be an average. Another type of average is a median. And that's the middle number in a sequence. So if you have set everything up from lowest to highest, say age groups of everybody in the class, whoever is the middle person, we would take that as the median or middle. The mode is the number that occurs most often. So mode is most. That's the number that you see occurring most often. So a lot of times when we talk about averages in the news or in social media, we make the assumption that it's a mode, and it really is not a mode at all, and it's often skewed for one reason or another. So we need to be careful when or be critical when we hear somebody say, that's the average response, that's the typical response, that's the normal response. So back to statistics a little bit again, right? So this is a bell-shaped curve. You have what we call a normal distribution. Now, if you take anything and you get enough data on it, you're going to eventually have what we call a normal distribution or a bell-shaped curve, where you have most of the cases falling in the middle, 60%, and then you have a small percentage on either side, and it creates this nice bell-shaped curve. So usually we give the impression when we are talking about averages in the news or in social media that it's going to be this perfect symmetrical bell-shaped curve, the mean, median, and mode. All of the averages are going to fall right in the middle. But that's generally not the case. Normally what happens is the averages can be quite misleading. This is what we call a skewed curve. And this happens when we have outliers. So an outlier might be one large case that falls over here or falls over here. As you see, when a curve is skewed, your median and your mean are in two different locations, and that can definitely change what that number means and allows people sometimes to misrepresent those numbers. So why is it important to distinguish between an average and a typical response? So let's just talk about a few of the examples that they gave us in the textbook. For a typical response for marriage, 80% of all people report high levels of well-being before marriage with no significant increase after marriage. So generally, people who are pretty comfortable and happy and have a strong sense of self, when they get married, report themselves as comfortable and happy and having a strong sense of self. About 5% of people will report an increased well-being in the years before and sustained in marriage afterwards. And then about 10% of people found that getting married would quote unquote cure their unhappiness, right? So those are the typical responses that you might hear. An average of that, if we took all of those together, we could say that people report themselves as happier when they are married. For divorce, the highest quality marriages, divorce produces a decrease in happiness. So if you had a very good loving relationship and you got divorced, you're probably going to be less happy. If you have a very poor quality relationship, maybe there's physical financial or emotional abuse, divorce often produces an increase in happiness. But if you take an average, then essentially you could say divorce could result in a sharp and long-lasting decline in personal well-being. See how different that is going to come across when you talk about a typical response versus an average response. And the same thing happens with loss and bereavement. We've probably all heard the statistic, oh, it takes about a year to get over somebody. If you lose somebody in a relationship due to especially like them passing away or illness, that kind of thing. When we talk about an average, that's probably true. But when you talk about a typical response, that is absolutely not true and actually can cause some harm to people who are actually going through loss and bereavement. The typical response for somebody who encounters real loss or bereavement in a relationship that they have with another person, about 20% of those people will feel a sharp sense of decline in their well-being, and then it gradually returns. So it usually takes, it's usually a really sharp decline for about 2 to 3 months, but as human beings, we can't really sustain that type of emotional decline for a very long time. And emotionally and physically, our bodies will start to come back slowly but surely. About 60% of people do not experience persistent, long-term, ongoing sadness. Now, when you think about the way we talk about loss and bereavement, to hear that number, 60 people don't experience significant, persistent sadness, it sounds like it's contradictory. But the typical response is that people have very significant sadness, and then that sadness is not long lasting. About 15% of people do experience lower levels, essentially, of life satisfaction, and about 5% of people experience higher levels of life satisfaction. Now, it says in the book why that happens, and I kind of have here why that happens, asking you why, right? So why do some people experience lower levels of life satisfaction while other people experience higher levels of life satisfaction after they lose somebody? So these are the reading comprehension questions. I just post them in. The questions that you want to answer will sometimes be here in the PowerPoint, but they will always be in the discussion board within your groups. So take a few minutes, review those questions, see if you can answer them, and get together with your group mates and answer them in your discussion board. Have a great day, and I hope my first videos weren't too bad. I'm not a fan of making videos of myself. By the way, this is my attempt at a background. My son thinks it's funny, so he said I should keep it. So I hope you like it. I'm going to try to switch it out for you guys. Have a good evening or good morning. Thank you very much.